in the room and those connected online. Welcome to the EP Library and today's EPRS Policy Roundtable that we titled, Does the EU Have Enough Resources to Finance Its Priorities? Finances are key in politics. The budget is or should be a reflection of political priorities. And without sufficient financial resources, political priorities cannot be reached. We witness that the EU budget is currently under significant pressure. The EU has sent massive financial aid to Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has led to high inflation and high interest rates, which means that the available space in the EU budget has become even tighter. For the European Parliament, the revision of the current long-term budget, the multi-annual financial framework, is crucial to address the unprecedented challenges and shocks that the EU is currently facing. The existing margins and reserves in the multi-annual financial framework are widely used up. In June, the Commission presented a package of proposals to revise and increase the multi-annual financial framework. Part of the package are proposals to set up a Ukraine facility of up to 50 billion euros and a strategic technologies for Europe platform with the redeployment and a 10 billion euros in new resources. The Commission also adopted a new proposal on own resources. Reflecting the timeliness of the roundtable today, the Committee on Budgets adopted its position on the MFF revision this morning, and it also had a debate on own resources. I would like to use this opportunity to point out that there has been recent EPRS publication on the MFF revision as well as in the reform of the own resources. The two most recent studies have been published yesterday, and you will find all studies on our website, and some copies are also available in the back of our event. The currently debated budgetary files are certain to create a hot autumn for the EU, particularly when taking into account the need to decide on financial support for Ukraine before 31st of December, as the current EU support runs out at the end of this year. At the same time, to complicate matters, it seems that if at least one member state would attempt to leverage the unanimity procedure of the MFF revision to unblock frozen EU funds. However, beyond the current issues, we also have the question of long-term budgetary resources for the EU. In her State of the Union speech, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen gave a clear signal in favor of further enlargement. This raises questions as to whether the EU's budgetary procedure is ready for enlargement. What has to be done to ensure budgetary stability in a larger EU while preserving core rights of Parliament such as democratic control and scrutiny? I'm looking forward to an exciting debate on the future of the EU budget, where we are honored to have with us one of the two co-rapporteurs for the reform of own resources, Valérie HAYER, the two co-rapporteurs for the revision of the MFF, Margarita Marques and Jan Olbrecht, and finally Jan Beck, who is a professor of the London School of Economics and Political Science, and who is a renowned expert of EU finances and regular guest and collaborator of the European Parliament. So with this, I turn over to the esteemed panel under the moderation of Tim Peters, who is the head of the Budgetary Policies Unit of the EPRS. Tim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Anders. Also welcome from me to all distinguished panelists, to the participants here in the library, but also online. There will be a chance to ask questions after an introductory debate here on the panel. You can ask questions here in the room. There will be a microphone, and you can also ask questions online through the chat function, and they will be collected, and later we will integrate them also in the debate. I'm really looking forward to the debate. We have managed to have 4 renowned experts on the budget here on the panel, 3 members of parliament and 1 academic. And so that should be enlightening to us. We will start with a short introductory statement on the subject by each speaker. And we start with you, Ms. Marques. Margarita Marques has been a member of the European Parliament for Portugal and the S&D Group since 2019. She's vice chair of the Committee on Budgets and co-rapporteur, one of the 2 co-rapporteurs for the multi-annual financial framework revision. And prior to this, she was a member of the Portuguese Parliament, State Secretary for European Affairs, and an official at the Commission, so a colleague. And She holds a degree in mathematics, statistics, and a master's degree in education sciences. I turn it over to you. Your microphone is there.
Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations having organized this debate. It's the good moment. It means the day when we voted the report in Budget Committee. And we know that this is not the end, but the beginning. So it's the vote, plenary on 3 or 4 or 5 October. And before to move to my points, I think that with the introduction, it was clear why we need the MFF revision. And also, I'd like to say that now, today, maybe I prefer to be on the role of Jan. It means an academic that can look to these elements, find results, give ideas, elaborate scenarios. It's more, it's easier position, I'm sorry, but it's an easier position. Now we need to look to your job and your results, and it's a good idea that you are here with us, but we have a lot of responsibilities because we need to change MFF. We need to revise MFF. I don't know to explain why, it's clear, but I need to underline which was our strategy, me and Jan Olbrich, to prepare the report. Of course, when we demand the revision of the MFF, it was because it was needed. The point was, we will look to all the MFF and trying to do new proposals, because as you know, as you can imagine, all the colleagues from cohesion, agriculture, research, and so on, they want always more money for the programs. We decided to do differently. It means what we did is to give a scope to the report that it was the Commission proposal. This was our first decision. It's not easy, it's a political decision, but it's also a pragmatic decision. Because we know very well, which is the appetite or the deficit of appetite in the Council. So it's why we decided to remain to focus on the Commission proposal. The Commission proposal is a good one, a good starting point. It's not ambitious enough, of course, and it's why we are proposing to a top-up comparing to the Commission proposal. The Commission proposal already made the top-up of the current MFF, and what we did is to increase or to top up the budgetary lines where the Commission is doing a proposal. So this was our job, and it's why we said to other colleagues that their proposals were out of scope, and it's why we needed to organize meetings with the sectorial rapporteur to convince them to support this strategy. Why I'm saying this? Because this is important to understand that our proposal is not utopical, is very balanced. It means we can say that this is what we need in a responsible, target and balanced way. So this is how we work. So we have 6 pillars, we can say. Ukraine on the Commission proposal. Ukraine, migration, STEP, flexibility, Euroline, and the famous heading 7. I know that is an important heading for the officials. But we remain on these 6 vectors, these pillars, and we decided not propose a top-up for Ukraine, because the proposal of the Commission is good, and we need to support and to support Ukraine, and we need to balance the support of Ukraine and the support of European Union, including to mitigate the economic and social impact of the war and sanctions against Russia in the EU. So It means that you did a top-up for STEP, because STEP is a key priority of the Commission. We can't say that we need to deeper to increase the strategic autonomy of the European Union and don't give the instruments needed to do it. Instruments on the legal aspect and also on the financing dimension. And it's why you propose a top-up of the step. Step, it means the step to move to a sovereignty fund in the future is what we wish. It was what President von der Leyen had promised to us during his speech on the State of the Union last year. So we propose a top-up on STEP program. The same on migration, because migration and the different lines linked to the migration on external strategy, because it's more and more important and is a more and more challenging. I don't know if it's more than in the past, but it's strong enough that it will need concrete actions from the European Union. The same with Euroline. It's not exactly the same. Euroline also is something that we are clear that when we approved MFF in 2020, December 2020, the interest rates were around 0. Nowadays, they are around 4. So it means that the money that is in on the budget or the debt line is not enough to pay interests. So it's why we need to have a strategy to mobilize money, enough to pay the interests of the debt, the Next Generation EU, but also we need to be sure that in the future the European priorities and European programs, European policies will not be cut, like research or cohesion or agriculture. They can't be cut to mobilize the money to pay Euroline, to pay the interests. So it's why the Commission proposal to put the amount to pay the interests over and above the ceilings is needed. So this is, and also on flexibility. Flexibility is empty. Of course, when we look to the last years, flexibility was a key dimension of the budget, but now is empty and we need to reinforce the flexibility line. So this is our position, and we are very committed to discuss all the pillars together. So we can't have an agreement on only one pillar and to forget other pillars. So we need to discuss all the pillars together, and this is very important for the Parliament, and the answer today with the vote, it's clear. So, of course, that we can ask how we will pay the increase of the budget. I don't want to give this responsibility to Valérie to answer to the point, but I need to look to the time, and I will give more answers. But one thing is clear. It means if we have political ambition, we need to be coherent. We can say to citizens that we have political ambition on strategic autonomy and so on and so forth, if finally we don't have money to develop these priorities. This is a key point. This is for the revision MFF. But let me add another point. We need to think also on the future. We need to have a permanent mechanism for crisis, but also in the future and for the next MFF, we demand to Ukraine and Moldova and the candidate countries that they need to prepare themselves to become a member state of the European Union, but the European Union must also to prepare itself to accept these countries as countries integrating our family. And for it, the European Union must look to, this is the more neutral word that I can use, look to the institutional aspects, but also budgetary aspects. And we need to start to discuss a new architecture of the EU budget. It's not acceptable to receive new member states until 30 or 35 with this framework on the budget. I know some recommendations that Jan and others that are looking and research since a long time ago what we can do, but it's clear that we need to move the architecture of the EU budget, and this is a key point to be prepared to receive new countries.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marques. We come to the next speaker. That's Jan Olbrycht. You have been a member of the European Parliament for Poland and the EPP since 2004, a very long time, a veteran, and you're a member of the Committee on Budgetary Control and a substitute member of the Committee on Budgets, and the other co-rapporteur on the revision of the multi-annual financial framework. You're a former mayor and president of one of the Polish regions, and you hold a PhD in sociology and also work as an academic lecturer, or worked as one. I turn it over to you, Mr. Olbrycht.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And of course, Margarita already explained all the details about our report. I will use the opportunity to change a little bit the role I'm playing in this building. When we change the floor, we change a little bit the point of view. I'd say one floor, several floors now we are politicians and we are just using our arguments like politicians. Now we are in a completely different level. They are here with the EPRS, and I think we are having the possibility to discuss the possible perspectives of future, what Margarita just started to speak. The question, what about the relation between budget and priorities in general, how it works? And of course, the question which has been asked for this debate is, do we have enough budget big enough for the European priorities? As a politician, a former mayor, and former president of the region, I must say yes and no. It depends how you define it. There are no clear answer. Of course, as politicians, some of the people say, of course, yes. Or the others say, oh, no, it's of course not. Well, but let's look at it very carefully. And of course, let's look at the model point of view. Let's think about the model. The model, which is a very ideal model, is on each level, city level, region, state, Europe, is okay, what we would like to do to simplify the whole situation. Of course, first of all, what we agree to do together, which is much more complex, because it's about the competences of EU. Okay, so this is the first step. What we would like to do together, and what are the exclusive competences and the other competences, okay, and what we can do separately at the same time. What is our common approach and what is our integrated approach, etc., in general? This is extremely difficult and is ongoing debate, but let's think about the model. So when we agree what we would like to do next 7 years, the second question should be how much it will cost. How much it will cost, what we just agreed. We agreed about priorities, from priorities to type of actions next to the projects. Okay, so how expensive it is, how much does it cost? And of course, this is a very important analysis. Do we know how much it will cost? So, okay, so we have our priorities and we have the analysis how much it will cost. Next question is, do we have enough money to do it what we have just agreed? We agreed about priorities and we know how much it will cost. Do we have money to do it? In the model world, say, okay, what is more important, priorities or budget? Priorities or budget? If we start with priorities, it means that we agree on this. So consequence is that we have to find money. No matter how. But we need priorities, so we need money. And of course, the money which reflects a real cost and not the not the ex-ante evaluation, which has nothing to do with reality. But of course, let's think that we have priorities and we know how to do it. The most important is priorities. And the question is, okay, so how much money we need? And of course, this is about national contribution. This is about the own resources, existing own resources. This is about necessary changes in the financial resources, which is about new own resources. The question is, do we have enough money to do it? Why? Because this is the political world. We are promising to the people. We say, we will do it. We, European Union, we, European politicians, we will do it. Of course, if everything is logic, I mean, priorities, costs, and resources as a result of this. But the world is different. I mean, the reality is different. And this is completely different strategy. This is, I remember the moment that one of the big meetings, very big meetings, I discussed it with the former Chancellor of Austria. And I asked the Chancellor of Austria, you know him, young man, and much younger than me. I mean, very long in the parliament, so much younger. And it's a very open meeting, and I said, Mr. Chancellor, why you don't start with priorities, costs, and resources? And he said from the stage, look, he said, this is purely NGO thinking. I quote. So here, this is NGO thinking. I said, no, but what you present, Mr. Chancellor, is a pure finance minister. The finance minister is thinking how much money I have and what can I do? But this is the opposite perspective, which politically is also legitimate. But we should be very honest with the people. If we say, let's start how much money we have, it means that we will not give more than 1% of GNI. Let's think, this is the money we have. The question is, what can we do with the money? This is the completely opposite. When we count how much money, this is purely the budget, family budget. Yes, how much money we have, what we can do. We can buy a car or not. We have the budget, what we can do. And of course, let's again think about the costs. What we can do first, we should start with the heading 7. Yeah, because we have the costs of the institution. We have to take it into account because we cannot negotiate. This is just something which is stable. This is like all the costs which are stable, like the electricity, etc. This is fixed. How much money we have? And next, we are trying to find the most important, it means priorities for the money we have. And of course, what it really means, we have to reduce priorities. Let's be honest. Let's say, sorry, with this money, we can do only this and that. This is too expensive. Sorry, we don't have money. How can you say politically to the people in Europe, we will do it without money? Consequence, disappointment, frustration, populism, extreme right, extreme left, whatever you want. And they will say, you are lying. You are lying. You are promising us, and you don't keep the promises. And of course, we say, well, we don't have budget. You know, the former president of the budget committee, French, our colleague, it was the Arthuis. He always repeated, the citizens of Europe should understand European budget. I said, Mr. President, sorry, it's very, very naive. I mean, as a former mayor, you think that the people in the street are just discussing European budget? Or they want to know, do we have money for this and that, like in the city, in the region? They want a clear answer. And we are politicians to give them the answer, not to introduce them into complexity of European budget, own resources, etc. This is it. Just to summarize, the question, do we have enough money for priorities? If we think rationally, it means that we start with the priorities, resources, costs, and next the resources will be prepared for these priorities, of course, yes. But if we start with the budget, And of course, we keep the same priorities we dream of. And with budget we have in hands, the budget is absolutely nothing to do with the priorities. Priorities is purely political message without any background, any preparation. So I think that our responsibility of politicians is, first of all, to be honest. I mean, to say the truth to the people. But the truth is very, very difficult to say. But of course, they say, okay, this we can do, these are priorities. My question, and of course we probably will discuss it later, look what's going on. Cohesion is going down as priority. Why? Because the other priority is going up. And the more and more we have the back door and saying that if you want to take money from cohesion, you are free. It was your decision on a voluntary basis. There will be no public procurement, no state aid. You can take money from cohesion to another policies. This is the beginning of the end of cohesion policy, of shared management. This is just like, this is not the most important. This is not priority. Of course it's necessary, but there are the other things much, much more important. So, sorry to be so long, but I think that I just use the opportunity to be on this floor and not to give the political answer what we should do. Because I think that we should be realistic. Okay, both ways are possible, but let's be clear which one we take.
Thank you very much for your clear statement. We're coming to the third speaker on the panel, Valérie HAYER, and you've been a member of the European Parliament for France and the Renew Group since 2019. You're a member of Parliament's negotiating team on the long-term budget and also one of the two co-rapporteurs on the sources of revenue for the EU budget, the own resources. From 2008 to 2019, you were a municipal councillor in France and also from 2017 to 2019, vice president of the departmental council, Conseil de Département, and you hold a master's degree in public law, public administration and public management from Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne in France. I turn it over to you and as agreed, vous allez parler en français pour votre introduction.
Exactly. Thank you very much for the invitation. Indeed, I will speak in French. Ravi d'être avec vous. Et comme l'a dit Margarida, l'événement on va point nommer après le vote de ce matin sur votre rapport sur la révision du MFF. Et on est à un moment important. La Commission, elle nous a fait cette proposition aux États, évidemment également, à l'occasion de cette révision à mi-parcours, de 69 milliards d'euros supplémentaires. Pour certains, pour beaucoup, c'était inespéré. Pour certains, c'était irréaliste. Et quand on y pense, 69 milliards d'euros sur 4 ans, pour 450 millions d'Européens, répartis entre 27 États membres pour adresser l'Ukraine, les migrations, le remboursement des intérêts du plan de relance et notre autonomie stratégique, à la fois c'est beaucoup et c'est bien trop peu et bien trop insuffisant. Pour autant, on sait déjà, et certains États ont annoncé la couleur très très vite, on sait déjà que les négociations vont être extrêmement difficiles. Et cette situation où en fait on fait le constat qu'une proposition bien qu'insuffisante est politiquement considérée comme irréaliste, elle est le reflet de l'état du budget européen qui est dépendant des contributions nationales, un budget européen auquel on demande toujours plus, en tout cas des missions, une Europe à laquelle on demande toujours plus de missions sans en assurer les moyens budgétaires, les moyens budgétaires supplémentaires. Et très clairement, sans moyens budgétaires suffisants, si on reste sur cette dépendance de ce budget européen aux contributions nationales, sur ce dogme du 1% du PIB, comment bâtir une Europe de la défense, comment relever tous les défis qu'on a déjà pu évoquer, comment bâtir notre autonomie stratégique, eh bien ça paraît impossible parce que c'est la réalité. Le vrai problème de fond, c'est la question que tu as aussi posée, que vous avez soulevée, c'est quelle vision pour l'avenir de notre Europe. Et force est de constater que Aujourd'hui, les États sont dans une incapacité ou ne veulent pas se projeter ou bâtir véritablement cette Europe plus communautaire avec ce budget européen qui serait renforcé. C'est ce qui fait que pendant 33 ans, on n'a pas eu et j'y viens au fameux sujet des ressources propres, et je voudrais saluer José Manuel Fernandez qui n'est pas là, mais avec lequel on travaille en parfaite cohésion sur le sujet des ressources propres. Et on l'a dit tout à l'heure, sur les questions budgétaires, vous allez devoir nous challenger, en effet, parce que globalement, on a une commission des budgets et des groupes politiques pro-européens qui sont plutôt alignés sur les questions budgétaires. Et donc, cette situation, elle explique que pendant 33 ans, on n'a pas créé de nouvelles ressources propres. Il a fallu attendre 33 ans pour arracher cette fameuse contribution plastique. Je vous mets au défi de me trouver un seul État qui, pendant plus de 30 ans, n'a pas créé une nouvelle ressource ou une nouvelle taxe pour alimenter son budget européen. Et la réalité, c'est que le budget de 2023 est financé de la même manière que le budget de 1988. Et les défis, ils sont d'une toute autre ampleur. Il y a les défis qu'on a évoqués, il y a le défi que tu as évoqué, Margarida, s'agissant de l'élargissement. Et on sait que l'élargissement, alors ça suppose une réforme de l'intérieur, mais ça suppose nécessairement, sans quoi ce serait un échec, une réforme du budget européen. Très concrètement, demain, si l'Ukraine ou quand l'Ukraine intégrera l'Union européenne, l'Ukraine sera la première bénéficiaire nette des fonds de cohésion. La France deviendra contributrice nette au titre de la politique agricole commune. La Pologne deviendra contributrice nette tout court. Et donc, c'est un choc géopolitique, mais c'est un choc budgétaire aussi qu'il faudra assumer. Et il faut véritablement repenser cette architecture et aller chercher de nouvelles sources de financement. Et c'est la nécessité qu'on porte, qui est d'accélérer sur les ressources propres. Les idées ne manquent pas. On a eu l'occasion de faire un rapport d'initiative au nom de la Commission des budgets endossé par le Parlement européen en début d'année avec des nouvelles idées. Il y a celles qui sont déjà sur la table et qu'on connaît, évidemment, les transactions financières dont le taux de TVA, la TVA était à 0%, les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, les rachats d'actions, les échanges de crypto-monnaies, etc., etc. Je porte aussi beaucoup l'idée qu'on devrait aussi pouvoir mobiliser l'épargne des Européens. On a vu en Belgique, en Italie, au Portugal, les États ont émis pour 60 milliards d'euros de bons d'État. Ça a très très bien fonctionné. Les citoyens ont répondu à l'appel. Et moi, je crois profondément que pour aller financer notre budget européen, on peut aussi aller chercher de nouvelles voies de financement, mobiliser l'épargne des Européens, ce qui permettrait aussi d'incarner mieux le projet européen et d'embarquer, je crois, les Européens dans cette dynamique collective et pour soutenir des investissements, notamment pour assurer notre autonomie stratégique. Mais au fond, les ressources propres, ça touche aussi à la fiscalité. Et la fiscalité, c'est vu comme un élément très identifié de la souveraineté des États. Or, la réalité, c'est que les États ont perdu beaucoup de leur levier en matière de fiscalité et que l'Europe, c'est aussi la bonne échelle pour retrouver de la fiscalité et reprendre la main sur des bases qui sont sous-imposées ou non imposées. C'est la manière également où le renforcement du budget européen, c'est ce qui nous permettra demain de ne plus être dépendant des contributions nationales, de réduire les contributions nationales, d'avoir un budget plus ambitieux. Donc, moi, je crois que c'est tout à fait explicable aux citoyens d'assumer, de dire qu'on doit avoir un budget plus ambitieux, autonome, pour répondre à nos priorités. On a une fenêtre de tir qui est quand même étroite. C'est la présidence espagnole, c'est la présidence belge. Vous n'êtes pas sans savoir qu'après la présidence belge, on sera dans un tunnel pendant 1 an avec des présidents successifs qui ne seront pas forcément les plus pro-européennes. Et donc, on fait le maximum pour faire pression sur les États pour qu'ils avancent sur la question des ressources propres avant juin prochain. Sans quoi, ce sera un boulevard pour les eurosceptiques qui assureront, et on ne pourra pas leur donner totalement tort, qu'on ne fait pas le nécessaire pour répondre à nos ambitions communes. Donc c'est un chantier qui est important, semé d'embûches, mais qui est absolument nécessaire pour bâtir cette Europe souveraine et puissante dans le monde. Merci.
strong and appropriate European budget. We come to our next speaker now. After 3 members of this house, we have an academic who will hopefully challenge us, and he also has prepared a little presentation for us, which we will show. Ian Begg is professor at the European Institute of London School of Economics and Political Science. His main research work is on the political economy of European integration and EU economic governance. He has directed and participated in a series of research projects on different facets of EU policy, and currently he's leading a research project on the future of the EU budget. You have also served as a specialist advisor to the House of Lords European Committee on the EU budget, and you also published several articles and even a short book on European Economic Monetary Union and budget questions. Now we hope we can start up the computer. We'll have a look.
I'll just use the opportunity to do a couple of introductions. The problem is French. It's a French keyboard. I don't know why France has to have a different keyboard from the rest of the world. Who knows? Right, just by way of introduction, this is my second visit to Brussels in a couple of weeks, and my wife hasn't even finished the previous box of chocolates yet, so I'm not sure I need to buy any more. You may wonder why a Brit is talking to you, and I get away with this by pointing out that I am in fact Scottish, which lets me off many of the criticisms of the Brits. I think I can put this one down. The regie will put the presentation on screen. Yes, there you go. What I'm going to talk about is the same title as everybody else, the long-term budget, but you'll see I've altered the subtitle by posing this rhetorical question about whether the midterm review is just filling in a kind of stopgap so that you can struggle through the current MFF, or whether it's the starting point for something entirely different, the springboard. So that's the first question for everybody to consider. It's been sort of hinted at by the other speakers, but I want to make it very explicit. Then, let me give my take on what's been said around the review. Marguerite has already been through in detail the 6 dossiers, and I think, to me, what I'm seeing is a largely positive response to the Ukraine facility and of the need to deal with the refugee flows. They seem to be pretty well accepted around the table. Step in between. There is hesitation about STEP, but maybe when it's seen in the context of what the Americans are up to and what the Chinese are up to, it's something that does lead towards the sovereignty fund that's been mentioned. But what's more awkward is the Euro instrument. It's no surprise, I think, that the member states will say, if we're paying for it, why should we pay more from our national budgets when we're also facing high interest rate charges? So it creates a kind of perverse incentive for them. And offsetting the costs of higher rates of administration costs, well, here are the challenges. Well, the 2% inflator in the EU budget, not deflator, because it inflates, is one which the EU budget has benefited from in the previous decade. So why should it complain when it goes in the other direction? That's going to be far more tense. But I want to suggest that rather than arguing about whether a little bit more here, a little bit less there, fine, Margarita, push for it, by all means. But what about seeing the midterm review as a trajectory? It's the step towards the next MFF. And this is where you need to think about what's going wrong with the EU budget. The inflexibility, the ambiguity about what public goods it funds, the fact that some of the key principles, unity, universality, and so on, get increasingly flouted. You have the proliferation of all these new instruments that have been used to deal with crises and to find a way around the difficulty of changing anything in the core budget. So all of these become challenges to be dealt with. And one in particular I draw attention to is that external assigned revenue, at least during the period of Next Generation EU, is going to be on the same level as own resources. And that seems a very odd thing to be looking at when you consider that own resources are in the treaty and is supposed to be there. External assigned revenue was really conceived of as the contributions of Liechtenstein, or maybe Norway and Switzerland, so in small amounts for EU policies. So there's a big challenge there to deal with. Question I put to everybody is, what do you think that the midterm review can say about what happens after 2027? What appetite for change is there? And there's been some mention of the study we're doing for the Parliament at the moment. We've tried to do scenarios for a much more radical integration of off-budget mechanisms inside the budget, or a separation. But a third scenario is tweaking the status quo. And I would argue that, broadly speaking, the midterm review is a form of tweaking. It's not negative. You can regard it positively as to trying to make it work better, but it does lead to saying the status quo is the way forward. Certainly, enlargement, which Valérie has just mentioned, is going to be a key topic. Just consider one statistic. The average share of agriculture in GDP across the member states is 1.3%. In Ukraine, it's 11%. So if you have the same sort of agricultural regime for potential new members, starting with Ukraine because it's the biggest, but Albania, where it's an even bigger share, then you have to rethink quite radically the nature of direct payments. Some would argue that Ukraine doesn't even need direct payments because it has a competitive agricultural sector. I'm sure if I'm being heard by anybody in France, I'm about to be shot, so I've got to be very careful here, or Poland. So this is a concern. But other new demands, defence. Is the budget going to deal with defence? Well, it looks as though from what was said in the State of the Union speech that yes, that's something that's going to come into consideration. Quite how is another question. Then we have to think about a new approach to the revenue side, both corrections and own resources. Here, I would hope that some suggestion would come out from economic theory, which is part of what we're doing in the present study. So here's what the economic theory tells you, and here's what the EU budget is. Is there any correspondence between the two? No. Is that not maybe a problem to look at? And what I'd like everybody in the room to do is imagine this. You have a blank sheet of paper. And your task is to write down what goes in the EU budget. I'll give you 4 more seconds to think about this. And say that there are 3 sorts of categories. Things you have to do, the cost of administration, certain treaty obligations which are unavoidable. Second, public goods at EU level, and here I'm stealing some ideas from Marco Butti and one or two of his colleagues who have been thinking about this, that there are EU-level public goods which we all recognise. Climate, external action, maybe some sense of digital being an EU public good. But it's also worth considering something to which hardly anybody has an answer either, is what is EU added value? And here I give you 2 possibilities, that it's cost efficiency. The EU can provide public goods more cheaply than individual members. Or it's that there is under-provision for various reasons as a result of the EU not taking on it being left to member states. And the classic example is, would the Austrians build a road across the Alps unless somebody else is going to pay for it? Because Austrians aren't going to use it, Germans and Italians are. So that's under provision. But the third category is the one which is sometimes more problematic. Much of what the EU budget does is to fund national public goods. Now, that may be fine. You may say we need the EU funding national public goods, but given the size of the EU budget compared with the relative size of national public goods, is this the right way of approaching it? Certainly for certain investments, the EU may be better. It may be also that you want an element of distribution involved, which is cross-border fiscal transfers. They're there, obviously, in cohesion policy. They're there in agricultural policy, but less deliberately. So is there a motivation for having cross-border transfers? Now, let's consider an alternative. bring in public economics. What is the rationale for the EU level to spend? It could be subsidiarity. It could be clear identification of added value. Both work. We've lost sight of the principle of subsidiarity. The Butty line of argument I put forward to you that if the public good is genuinely European, what's the advantage of that? Well, maybe it's a bit easier to get round the phenomenon of all these finance ministers arriving in negotiations with somebody in the corner with a spreadsheet saying, we lose, forget it. Because that is the basis of much of the discussion. And it's maybe easier if you have a clear connection between European public goods and certain own resources, particularly in the area of green taxation, or what more broadly can be called Pigouvian taxation, trying to change behavior on things, then it makes it easier to identify the own resources. What is Next Generation EU? Well, as I said before, it's EU public goods, but delivered nationally, which is an important way of thinking about it, because it brings in a form of delivery which is not the same as co-financing at a national level. And this is a shared management, because it's a different approach to it, and yet it's often doing the same things. Then, here Margarita is going to disagree with me, the national envelopes are a tricky issue, because they prejudge much what's in the budget as a result of various formulae that are applied. So the negotiations are almost cleared because of the national envelope before you discuss anything that might be different. And this is indirectly a form of calculation of net balances. So that's a further difficulty. Now this chart may look complicated, but it's not really that complicated. What I'm trying to get at here is the new demands on the MFF coming from, on the left-hand side, debt service and debt amortization, and on the right from the possibility that guarantees would be called, not necessarily on Next Generation EU, but some of the other big funds, particularly Ukraine. If we borrow, I can still allow myself to say if we borrow to support Ukraine. But then it also means that these are priority obligations, or as some are now calling it, non-discretionary expenditure for the EU level. And that in turn is going to be have an effect on other budget lines, bottom right. But it will also mean that there will be an increased demand on own resources if more spending has to be done. And what's that going to be? Is it raising the GNI resource, or is it truly getting towards genuine own resources? That's affected by markets, because the interest rate is affected by financial markets. On the other side, own resources coming from member states are affected by macroeconomic conditions. So all these things do tend to come together. So I'll finish with a series of questions rather than conclusions. 35 years after 1988, Valérie has already said this, major reset. Is it not time for it? European public goods, I would say, should be at the heart of such a reset, but it needs a real debate on what constitutes European public goods. Is it time, maybe, and this is part of the research we're doing at present, to consider an EU-level fiscal framework? We have the paradox almost that the EU has been very tough on member states insisting on fiscal frameworks, but we don't quite know what one is at EU level. Could we introduce that? Particularly, how do you integrate off-budget mechanisms? A new approach to solving the revenue side. What I'm going to suggest is that rather than continuing to argue about this own resource, or that own resource, or a third own resource, set a target for a level which genuine own resources have to reach by a certain date, and put that at the headline of the policy making, and then fill it with the own resources that make sense, a different way around. And then, here's even more radical. Is it maybe time for some sort of intergovernmental conference, naturally involving the institutions such as this one, to rethink the budget? So I'll leave you with these two images. 1988 being a very long time ago. Margarita, you've seen this already, so you're familiar with it. Two options. One is Bill Murray, Groundhog Day. you go through the same process year after year, MFF after MFF? Or is it genuinely a case of, if not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Beck. I think that was very enlightening on the situation of the EU finances that we have, and also enlightening on some possible options on where we could go and what the decisions should be. I now ask just a few questions here to get a bit of a debate on the panel, and then we open up to the Q&A. My question to Ms. Marques would be, I mean, you have yourself worked in the Portuguese government, and you know the national perspective. What do you think is the most convincing strategy if here on the panel everybody seems to agree that we need a bit more money in the next budget, be it now the revision, but also then in the next MFF? What would be the most convincing arguments also if you speak to your successor now, the Secretary of State for European Affairs, to convince him that Portugal should spend more on the EU?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, I had here some points to react, but I think that we need to have time for questions and answers. So this is, of course, as member of the Portuguese government, General Affairs Council, I had the opportunity to have the Austrian Chancellor as my colleague in the Council. So I know him very well. But also I made, as part of Portuguese side, the midterm review, the MFF midterm review 2014-2020. So it was not a difficult exercise. It was a review, it was not at all a difficult exercise. I think that, I don't know if my framework is exactly the same of Jan. Of course, maybe the framework is the same. I don't know if my answers are the same than Jan. But this is a key point. It means from the Portuguese side, I think that I can't speak on behalf of the Portuguese government, by the way, but as Portuguese MEP, the point is that now in the Council, we need to be serious. It means we can't propose more and more and not revise MFF. So this is clear, because the MFF, it's not enough. It's clear for the Commission. The Commission put the proposal on the table after a tour de capitale, after speaking with all the member states. So this revision is needed. And of course, member states must participate more in the EU budget if they are integrated. For example, Jan raised an interesting point. It means the concept of public goods and European public goods. And I think that is the moment to answer to the moment nowadays, but we need to introduce some elements for the future. Because in 2 years, less than 2 years, the Commission will put on the table the proposal for the next MFF. So we need to learn more. This is one positive point, but it's also a negative point, because member states compare with the current MFF to be the base for the future. It's also because they don't want to increase MFF. But for me, what is important is mobilize political will. There are member states that want Ukraine only. There are member states that want STEP and defense. There are member states like Italy and South that wants more money for migration. Catastrophes as we had during this summer. So member states are very divided, but it's always like this. As I read, it's always like this. Maybe now I feel a bit worse, I need to say. But we need to mobilize, and I think that is the Portuguese strategy, is to mobilize the different interests to put together and to create a political will for a new MFF. This is very, very important. I only react to one point, is the idea of net contributors and beneficiaries. It's an argument used by Valérie also, but it's something that I think that this duality is not the reality. because the net contributors are the net beneficiaries. The Commission published the last 2020, summer 2020, the Commission, I can't say made a leak, but published, or I don't know the best word, a table where it's clear who are the beneficiaries of the internal market. And the net contributors are also the net beneficiaries. And I think that we can't remain on this duality. So we need, of course, all the member states are beneficiaries of the internal market. If you look to the matrix, it's right, there are contributors and beneficiaries, but on the end of the day, we need to look to the other side. There are a very interesting expression that during the crisis, it was very current in Portugal. If the economy in one country is not good, citizens of this country will not buy German cars, but Japanese or Korean or Chinese. So it's different. And a good and on a level playing field of the internal market is for it, the economic situation good in all member states is needed. So this is the key point. And I can say that Portugal is enthusiastic to revise MFF, but I think that my country will not block the revision of MFF. And by the way, my Prime Minister is demanding this, the European Union to prepare to accept new member states from the institutional point of view and from the budgetary point of view.
Thank you very much. Now, that's a good point. Enlargement, I think that was mentioned by all the speakers here as a challenge, institutional, but also budgetary challenge. Mr. Olbrecht, Poland is one of the most vocal defenders of Ukrainian interests within the EU. At the same time, if or when this moment comes that Ukraine will take part into the EU or will accede to the EU, Poland might also be one of the countries that loses a lot of EU money if we don't reform things, because as Professor Beck pointed out, particularly in agriculture, but also in other areas, Ukraine and other countries will need a lot of money, and then countries that are now receiving a lot of EU funds might not get so many anymore. How do you see a solution for that? Will Poland be prepared, or what has to be changed to make an enlargement possible?
Yeah, this was. I was afraid that you would ask me the question about Polish government. So even Valérie, when she said about the tunnel of the Eurosceptics, it was very clear that she doesn't believe in our victory in the election in October. But if there is a change, political change, the situation will be different, of course, because they will be much more pro-European element. But your question is absolutely basic. That's why I think that going a little bit to refer to the Professor's speech, I think this is the moment. This is the moment, because first, this is the moment for change, because this is the beginning of the big change. Why? First is the NGU, the shift. I mean, in the Germany, France, to allow to go to the financial markets. We remember some months ago it was completely impossible. So the shift to take the big credit on the financial market is changing completely European Union. That's why the European skeptics, they were absolutely furious because of this move. So this was the first part of the change. The other change was not by the decision of EU, but by the war. The war completely changed the whole situation. So the war is completely different with all the consequences of the war, the costs, the relation between the member states, the relation inside the EU, because the war will influence the situation inside the EU. By the way, we were just discussing with our colleagues the new French-German paper about the multi-speed Europe, which is also the consequence of the war. I mean, something we were discussing many, many years ago, now it's reality. And what they write for these countries who are willing to join the first speed. So this is new. when you speak about the Ukraine, this is very clear. And of course, everybody who thinks seriously about the EU knows very well that the decision for the candidate countries to Ukraine and Moldova is the first sign to change completely EU. I mean, EU will be completely different. You cannot compare it with today. There will be different EU, because this EU will prepare itself for the new enlargement in many, many elements. First, decision-making. Decision-making should be prepared before the enlargement. Can you imagine that Ukraine is coming to you, you have the same system of decision-making? No way. Before each enlargement, there was decision to change the voting system, including our enlargement. It also changed before. I mean, the very famous Nice and Lisbon. So the decision-making, construction of European Parliament will be completely different. Budget will be different. I don't think that this will be just like net contributors. There will be new construction. What kind of construction? This is the open question. This is the open question. Why? Because according to today's indicators, if Ukraine enters, all the others will be net payers. So I think this is completely different. We have to prepare ourselves for the agriculture policy. I mean, it could be prepared. Why? We see what's going on now with the Ukrainian products, yes, going to Poland, Romania, etc. But this is just a small sign of what can happen in future. So European Union has probably the time, maybe 5-10 years, to prepare itself to completely new situation, new budget, new distribution, etc. Probably in 10 years' time, who knows, if the prediction of Professor will not be correct, it means that much more to the European common good and common investment, etc., and not to go to reinforce the national investments through European money. Who knows what will be about the shared management? So I don't think there is a clear answer. When you want to put today's situation in the context of Ukraine enlargement, of course, this is, but I don't expect that you would like us to lose the election in Poland when you ask this kind of question. You know, because in Poland, when you ask, can you imagine the Ukrainian enlargement in the EU? What would you have? We will be net payers. My God, we lose all the money, etc. So the anti-Ukrainian approach will jump. No, I don't expect this is your intention, but I think that we should be very clear. If the future enlargement will be prepared with the completely reconstructing of EU, it will be different EU, decision-making, unanimity in the Council, let's say everything will be different. If not, I don't think that there will be a unanimous decision of the Council to accept Ukraine, if it's not well prepared.
Thank you very much for your reply on this, I admit, not so easy question. Of course, I didn't want to predict any outcome of the election, but I think also an EPP-led government will have to face that question and that as a challenge. And I'm happy that you are optimistic that you say it's 10 years, we have 10 years time to prepare. I think the Ukrainians want to become member sooner than that, but let's see. And also looking at other reforms in the past, institutional reforms and budgetary reforms. We just, I think, said it was 33 years since the last big reform. 10 years is not so much, even if we should have that, for EU reforms. Mrs. HAYER, you as a specialist for own resources, we know if we want more money and also more stable financial basis of the EU budget, we should also look at new own resources. Where do you see the most positive or successful examples that would be most acceptable to member states and which would also bring the most revenues to the EU budget? Where do you see, so to say, the things where we could or should focus on?
We have a proposal on the table, and with ETS, CBAM revenues, and a temporary contribution based on the benefit of enterprises, waiting for the BFIT proposal from the European Commission. I must say we want more and we worked on an initiative report on the beginning of the year with our colleagues to convey messages to the Commission and the Council that own resources is important and we need to move forward. So I think we have two more steps now. At the moment, we are waiting for the member states to vote in the Council regarding ETS, CBAM, and enterprises contribution, if I can say, temporary contribution now before the elections, before the channel I spoke about, even if I count on you and your friends, Polska 2050 friends to And now what we want from the Council is to decide and to vote quickly. We need to move forward, also to guarantee that specifically in the context of the campaign, we said, people, Europeans, you will not pay for the recovery plan. The big polluters, the big enterprises who don't take their part will pay. And now we don't have yet a move forward. So that's very important that we have the political vote in the Council to say, we decided in 2020, that was our political and legally engagement. So now we are moving forward. And then we will have, when it will be done, and I think we need to put pressure on the Council because it's still difficult, we know that. One point I made this morning with the DG Budge, Stéphanie Rizzo, was, but I hadn't the answer. Last week, Ursula von der Leyen didn't speak at all about own resources. It was not in her speech at all. That means something. I think that doesn't mean something good. So it means that it's still very complicated, and I'm it's disappointed that the President of the Commission doesn't have the leadership on that issue. And so first step, I hope we will have a vote in the Council before June next year, and then we will need to think about more new own resources. We have a lot of ideas in the European Parliament that were in our report. If we consider cryptocurrencies, if we speak about public goods, we are asked in our report that every project that have or every new initiative that have which is a European initiative that created revenues must become European revenues. That's an important point. So we know that's a difficult issue, difficult fight, but we are still trying to convince some member states. Some of them are very supportive of the new own resources, if I can say Italy, France, Portugal, France, Belgium, for example. But for the others, sometimes it depends on the new own resources we consider. For example, Luxembourg, they don't like the corporate tax or resources. And also we have some countries for which the issue of the own resources is quite ideological. They don't want to give more power to Europe and to the European Parliament. So that's the initial question. What do we want for the future of our budget?
Thank you. I'm looking at the time, and before we run out of time, I'd also like to give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions, and we'll also check the online audience, and then any replies that are there, you can also have additional comments then, Professor Beck, on those. May I ask for any questions here in the room? And please make the question short and to the point. No co-statements, please. And please briefly introduce yourself and your organization.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Piotr Buras. I'm the head of the Warsaw Office of European Council on Foreign Relations. I have a question about the urgency of the MFF reform with the view to enlargement. Because we are talking about the perspective of 10 years. Mr. Olbricht said in 10 years we have as the European Union time of 10 years. But I'm just wondering if we take the year 2030 as a kind of a orientation target for the EU to be ready for enlargement. When should this debate start, or when should the new MFF, this new concept, the reform, be basically ready? Do we need a completely new architecture of the EU finances already for the next MFF, or can we go about, for example, Ukraine's accession to the EU in 2030 with some transition periods and kind of prolong this current framework to the MFF 2035 plus?
Thank you. Further questions in the audience? Because then we can maybe put group 2 or 3 together. There, I see in the second row.
Thanks. Anna Kolesnichenko, Foundation for European Progressive Studies. So I have kind of a combination of comment and question. And so it's about the comparison of the EU budget or state budget to household budget, which I think is not correct. And I mean, many economists say this, and because the states, they have sovereign power, and so they can, by its power, by the sovereign power, actually tax or find other things which households cannot do. So state resources are not limited in the same way as household resources. And so here in this context, then, so of course this one way is new taxes, new revenues that you can do. And then another area which is not explored so much is cooperation with ECB. For example, now we know that there are 3.6 trillion of idle money sitting, of idle liquidity sitting on the ECB accounts from the commercial banks, which is waste of resources. And at the same time, the banks receive 145 billion annual subsidy from ECB for keeping these resources there. And so, first of all, no one allowed these subsidies to happen. And so probably we should use these resources somehow better. So this is also a good source. So question would be, are there any talks to ECB in this direction? Have anyone thought of this?
Okay, thank you. I don't see any immediate question. Alina, do we have questions from the online participants?
Yes, we have one question from Adrian. And he says, we hear we need to put pressure on the Council. What kind of pressure? How hard will the EP fight for a change in the budget? And I would add in the whole power sharing and power distribution around budget.
Good, thank you very much. Maybe Professor Beck, we start with you. When it comes to the urgency, do we need one big bang at a certain moment, or can it be phased in, and until when? And I don't know whether the question on the ECB, you also can say something on that.
Right. Well, one answer on urgency is to look in the other direction. Since 1988, when the budget was set in its current form, and if you looked at it in 1988, what it is today, you say, I recognize that. It's very much what I found then. What we had since then, for enlargement, maybe completion of the internal market, the advent of EU, and at least 4 major crises, and yet the budget sails through untouched. In 2004, the Sapir report already called it a historical relic. So yes, there is urgency. And the triggers coming from the next enlargement, we already hinted at some of them, the possibility of defence, the need to rethink agriculture, the great demands on cohesion policy, but also what else? What are the things that are not in the budget that ought to be considered for the future? This should be part of the story. I won't risk getting into own resources. We can maybe discuss that bilaterally later. But there are big questions about how own resources are going to work. And that, I think, ties in with the question on what I'm calling the power to tax. The power to tax in the EU is with member states. If you decide on something else to tax compared with what's already being taxed, it's still a member state competence. The banks we have to be rather careful about banks. ECB money, yes, the ECB can generate what's called monetary income. What monetary income there is currently distributed to the members of the Eurozone on a GNI key. If that comes to the EU budget, guess what? It's a GNI resource. So be rather cautious about doing this. As for the balances in banks, well, that's financial money. It's not tax money. It's not something you can take and hope to use as an EU resource because it's not necessarily permanent or a steady flow of income. So we have to be very careful about thinking what is genuinely a fiscal resource as opposed to large sums of money floating around in the system which are not accessible to a fiscal authority.
Yeah, Ms. Marques.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions on the urgency. Of course, some days ago, a Portuguese journalist asked me, can the decision be taken soon and is it easy? And my answer was never soon nor easy. So this is the answer to your urgency, but of course it's urgent. On the Sapir report, I'm not an enthusiastic of the Sapir report. It was not par hasard that they were refused to use the recommendations from Sapir report because I'm very online to protect cohesion policy. And the approach proposed by Sapir was to give more importance to resume the report. Sapir is difficult, but time is almost over. Of course, we need to introduce the competitiveness dimension on cohesion policy, but the competitiveness can't replace the cohesion policy. This is my criticism concerning Sapir report. But your point is very, very interesting. It means, of course, when we speak on a new architecture of the budget, it means new financing sources and maybe a different spend, how to spend the money. Of course, I think that the risk is to start this discussion having as base the framework nowadays. And of course, we need to look to the ECB, we need to look to the IEB and the role that IEB can take. We need to look to ESM. So where there are some money that it's not used because member states didn't want to use this money on the conditions that the money can be used. So we need to look to all the institutions to find a compromise how to finance in the future the EU budget. It's why I think that your point is very important because the debate, it's not only contribution of the member states, new own reserves. We need to introduce other elements, and the element that you put on the table, it's one of them. Finally, pressure on the Council. I think that we need to do what we did in 2020 negotiations. So the Parliament is united for the MFF revision, and we need, how can I say, we need to have nowadays President Metsola as David Sassoli made in 2020. It means European Parliament united with a strong leadership of the President of the Parliament. So we need to use all the mechanisms, the interinstitutional meetings and so on and so forth, but to be very vocal from the political point of view, and of course the other ways we know very well how to do. I can't say that we will succeed, not at all, but I think that we need to be more vocal, and the President of the Parliament can play an important role because the Parliament is very united around this proposal.
Add one thing, Tim. Maybe a different answer to your question about the money floating around in banks is to ask whether EU policies need to be funded by grants, by expenditure, or by loans. What we found with Next Generation EU is that loans have been taken out which have to be repaid, but some of it's distributed as grants. But some EU policies are funded exclusively by loans, particularly things like macroeconomic financial assistance. And it may be that what we need to explore is how the financial sector can generate new activities for lending. You mentioned the European Investment Bank. The European Investment Bank lends for projects. It borrows from the financial markets on very favorable terms. It may be we need to explore more of that lending as a means of financing EU policies and not think exclusively of grants.
Mrs. Hayes, on the questions you can choose which one to answer, but the third one, how hard Parliament will fight Council, you have to answer.
Very shortly, I think to answer your question also regarding the timetable, we will tomorrow negotiate the MFF, and I hope that we will have a decision in the Council, a vote in the Council regarding new own resources. Hopefully, or I hope it will be at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year, very beginning. After tomorrow, we will have to think to this big bang. So tomorrow we will finish the negotiation, and after tomorrow we will have to think about it because of the enlargement, because of all the challenges we have. So we will take our part as Parliament to think about this new budgetary architecture, and this must be considered largely our budget, as Marguerite said, considering all the other institutions, fiscal policy too. That must be a very large view to consider our budget, our investments to tackle all the challenges we have. Regarding the fight against Council, I remember that was my first negotiations about an MFF. We as Parliament, we were strong. We were stronger than before, if I can say. You were already there, Margarida and I weren't, but all the people who were around the negotiation told us that more and more the European Parliament is stronger in the negotiations. Here it will be more difficult because we were asking for the MFF revision or review, it depends. We asked for it in 2020. And the member state, they hadn't any appetite for it, except it regarding, as you said, Margarida, regarding Ukraine file. So as Parliament, we will stick united and also negotiate as a package, because, as you said, Margarida, some member states, I think there is a large consensus regarding Ukraine. Some member states would prefer migration issue, some other steps, and so on and so on. For us, what will be very important is that we continue to negotiate all together. We have different rapporteurship for MFF, for STEP, for Ukraine, and we as Parliament, our force is to be united, so we will continue on that.
Mr. Albrecht, the question I think on the urgency was also regarding Poland again and your earlier remarks. And when it comes to how hard will Parliament fight, you are, as one of the veterans, probably can also say a bit on that.
Yes, so there were several elements. First, concerning the preparation for the new enlargement and how urgent it is. I think that I don't think it will happen in the next MFF. Next MFF will be a kind of preparation for the enlargement. I mean, the 8 till it will be 2028 till 34. Yes, I think it will be the very, very important period of preparation in each aspect. I mean, the decision-making, construction of budget, change of policies, because I don't think it will be possible in a very, very short time. The new MFF will start preparation next year. I mean, the next year, because there will be new commission, new parliament, etc. So, but I think this will be the moment. If MFF will be 7 years, because it's still again and again 5 years. I don't know, because the situation is so is changing so quickly. So probably the idea of 5 years will be back. Up to now, Council is against, but of course we will see. In general, the concept of MFF can be interesting. What will happen in future? I mean, the concept of MFF is not from the very beginning as you said. So probably it will be also the part of the changes. The question is, of course, how many countries will be at that time in the Eurozone? I mean, this is also important, because when the UK left, you know, you see who stay in the non-Eurozone and what is the political will to join Eurozone, except our country. Our country is not very open to the Eurozone, at least now. So I think that for me, that will be the preparation of the whole process, which will take time. When I said 10 years is just not to discourage Ukrainians, but of course the time will depend on the situation and not on any dates, because it will depend on the political situation in Europe and the behavior of Russians. The Russians will do everything to block it as much as possible. This is much deeper, but my prediction is that the changes will take time and will be very difficult. Probably the new convent or new conference, at least everything, change of treaty, absolutely necessary to be made before the enlargement. We cannot be with the same treaty after the enlargement, because it's different. Concerning the national budget versus EU, you know, 5 years ago, it was completely different. Now we have the NGU. We have the new situation. This is completely different. This is not the same difference between the national budget and the EU like before. Now we have the common debt, and we have to pay it back, etc., with all the possible consequences of this. And of course, what I said about the Austrian Chancellor, when he said NGO, he meant that what you want to do, it depends how much money we will give you. But of course, the situation is now different. I mean, this is the ongoing debate, as you remember. Is the NGO should be permanent, or should be just for one completely situation? This is ongoing debate, even among us in the political groups. And especially German elections, remember how it was important. I mean, the temporary or permanent. Madame Lagarde even expressed herself that it should be permanent. So etc. So it's different. And of course, if we have own resources, let's think that we have it. I mean, the new own resources, because we have own resources, new own resources, it will be completely different. I mean, the situation with the national budget will be different, so we cannot predict now. Concerning the council, oh my God, this is an interesting question. Have you noticed that some of us, we are in the government and some of us are not? In the parliament, we are in the same parties, like in the country. Margarida is in the government, in a way, partly. Valérie is in the government. I'm in the strong opposition of the government. Can you imagine that some of us will openly criticize our government for the behavior in the council? No, this is politics. This is politics, so we have to be very careful. This one is the interest of parliament. We together, we are defending the parliament position. But when you go into details, of course, we have to do everything, and of course, influence our governments if we are in the government. So that's why I count on Margarida and Valérie that they will non-officially influence Monsieur Macron and the Prime Minister of Portugal to change the position of the Council. This is one of the ways of working. This is not only the statements, Parliament is against the Council. No, no, it's much more complex. Much more complex because and in country, our governments, they want us to defend the position of the government. This is normal. This is the same. I'm in a better position because I'm in the opposition till the election, so I can very openly criticize the government. So I think this is very important. The second element, which is strategically important, is the question we are asking all the time, the Council and the Commission. For example, Budget 24. Does the Council really need revision or not? Is the revision absolutely necessary, or it can change the situation? If it can change the situation for better, they will not do it, because they will wait to the next year. If it's absolutely necessary to do it, because something will be completely blocked, we will do it with the Council. The question from our side, the Parliament, is to analyze their position, what they betray. I can give you the example. Money for Ukraine is finished the end of the year. It's finished. MFA, nothing, zero. The Verkhovna Rada, during the meeting with the Budget Committee, they declared they need urgently 37 billion now for functioning of the state. And the money in the budget is zero from the 1st of January. It means that it's absolutely urgent to do something. What can be done? Either MFF revision or the new MFA, which is going back to the financial markets and to borrow the money. And in the new nego box, what we were discussing today, you have the very interesting text. If we cannot manage till the end of the year, it will be introduced the temporary mechanism of 3 months to guarantee money for Ukraine, and next we will see. You know, from our point of view, as Parliament, we see that this is absolutely urgent. It must be done, because if not, we will have real problems. The question is, do we really need money for STEP? Most of the countries say no. Do we really need money for migration? Absolutely, yes. Especially look what's going on. Look what's going on. There is no money to do it. We have to do something with migration. We have to do something with the paying debt, etc. So this is also, if we want to influence Council, we have to analyze their way of thinking, what they are defending, who is in the government, and it's much more complicated and delicate way of working, not only going to the protests against the Council. The Council is also from our countries and from our parties, don't forget it.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting and enlightening on also the strategy towards the Council. I thank everybody here, particularly, of course, the panelists. I think they earned a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you to the EPRS team for preparing this event, also for preparing new publications, which can be taken also a paper copy there at the end, or you can download it, of course, also on the EP Think Tank website. And thanks to the technicians of the library who supported us. And I wish everybody an interesting rest of the day and a hot budgetary autumn.